My name is Amanda. I'm 44 years old, a ensign in the U.S. Coast Guard, my voice steadying despite the knot in my chest. The air felt thick with tension as I stepped through the double doors of the courthouse, my heart racing in my chest like a wild stallion. At 44 years old, I was an ensign in the U.S. Coast Guard, fresh from a deployment that had tested my resolve more than I ever thought possible. I could still recall the faint scent of saltwater and gunpowder that clung to me, a reminder of the war I had fought and the sacrifices I had made. But now, I found myself facing a different kind of battle, one that had nothing to do with the high seas and everything to do with the life I thought I knew. As I stood there in my crisp uniform, the weight of the $17 million inheritance pressing on my shoulders, I felt a rush of disbelief and dread. I had never pictured myself in this position, but after my grandmother's passing, life had become a whirlwind of chaos and confusion. My husband had told me that the money would change everything, yet I never anticipated that it would drag me into a tempest filled with whispers and judgments. I shifted my hands, clasping them tightly in front of me, trying to steady myself, but all I could hear was the incessant thudding of my heartbeat, a reminder that I was still a soldier, accustomed to facing adversaries. Then, amidst the crowd of spectators and lawyers, I saw her. John's ex-wife, the woman who had mastered the art of scorn, her gaze zeroing in on me like a hawk spotting its prey. My breath caught, and suddenly, the room felt smaller, the air even thicker. She stood frozen, disbelief etched across her face, before breaking into an expression that morphed into pure rage, unleashing an unholy scream that echoed off the sterile walls. Blood rushed to my face as a dozen eyes turned toward me, their judgment tangible. How could I possibly explain to them that I had never sought this money? That I had just returned from a place where life and death danced so closely together that even the thought of riches felt absurd? "Who do you think you are?" she shrieked, her voice slicing through the air like razor wire. My fingers trembled, and I fought to maintain my composure. I had faced enemy fire, navigated stormy seas, yet here I was, racked with uncertainty over a personal feud I had inherited alongside the cash. The very foundation of my marriage felt like it was crumbling beneath my feet, and all I wanted was to scream back that I was Amanda, a woman with dreams, scars, and a heart that just wanted to heal. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, I clenched my jaw and tried to stand tall, feeling the echoes of her disdain ripple through the silent crowd. Every heartbeat reminded me that I was more than just a veteran with a fortune. I was a survivor, a fighter who had wrestled with demons both on and off the battlefield. I had fought for my country, for my husband, and now I had to fight for my own dignity against a woman who seemed determined to bring me to my knees. The weight of her hostility surged through me with every anxious breath. I could feel the eyes of the onlookers, a mix of curiosity and judgment, as I stepped forward, ready to face whatever twisted game was about to unfold. My heart thundered in my chest, louder than the emotions swirling inside me, and I realized that this was my moment, whether I was ready or not. Before I go on, subscribe to the channel. Here, we tell the untold stories of military women, courage, sacrifice, and truth. Your support helps more voices like mine be heard. The day I returned from my deployment, the air felt different. It was thick with an anticipation I couldn't quite place, electric and unsettling. I trudged through the familiar streets of my hometown, the kind of place where childhood memories wrapped around me like a security blanket. But now, those memories clashed with the weight of my new reality, $17 million, inherited under the strangest circumstances, and the echoes of war still fresh in my mind. I was an ensign in the U.S. Coast Guard, and yet I felt entirely like a stranger in my own skin, a patchwork of who I used to be and who I needed to become. I parked my car in front of the house I grew up in, its white picket fence slightly warped but still standing. The neighbors had trimmed the hedges and painted their doors, but the smell of the lilac bushes in the yard was just as I remembered, sweet with a hint of nostalgia. I used to play in this yard, dreaming of adventures beyond the horizon, never imagining I'd face threats and decisions far different from childhood games of make-believe. Now, I felt like a ghost of myself, floating between two worlds, the one I'd left behind and the one I could no longer ignore. It was supposed to be a homecoming, but all I felt was a profound disconnection. In the days leading up to my arrival, it seemed I was the talk of the town, not just because of my service but because of the unexpected fortune that had come my way. News traveled fast in a small community, and whispers of the inheritance followed me like an uninvited shadow. Some were skeptical, others curious, but none could be prepared for the real drama that would unfold. I hadn't even taken off my uniform when I stepped inside my front door and was met with the last person I expected to see, Samantha, my husband's ex-wife. She was standing in my living room, an unwelcome guest in what I thought would be a sanctuary. The moment our eyes locked, a series of emotions flashed between us, confusion, anger, and a hint of something like pity. She screamed my name, the pitch so high it cut through the air like a knife. My heart dropped. I had always known about her, the woman who once shared my husband's life before I was a part of the picture, but I never anticipated her barging into my newly inherited space, brandishing all the history and pain that came with her presence. The tension in the room was suffocating, thick with the weight of our shared pasts and the indelible mark she still left on him. I felt the urge to defend my territory, to assert my role in his life, but instead, I stood frozen, questioning everything. "Why are you here?" I managed to ask, my voice steadier than I felt. The question hung between us, heavy and loaded. I sensed the vulnerability beneath her bravado as she rallied to reclaim her narrative, to assert her connection to him when I felt so distinctly like the outsider. I had come back from war, thinking I'd found a refuge, only to find myself back on the battlefield, but this time it was her and me battling for a semblance of understanding. I had always fought for what I believed in, but this was uncharted territory. I had to navigate not only my own wounds but also the complexities of this unwelcome reunion. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the elegantly landscaped yard. I stood at the threshold of my new life, clutching the envelope that had changed everything. $17 million. A number that felt entirely unreal, like something I'd read in a book or seen in a movie. But here I was, trying to navigate the complexities of this sudden wealth while still grappling with the ghosts of my past. The air was thick with anticipation, but my heart was heavy with the memories of my time at war, and the scars they left me. As I turned to walk into the house, a familiar scent wafted through the air, grilled chicken, seasoned to perfection. It brought me back to a simpler time, before the war, when I was just Amanda, a young girl in love, dreaming of a life filled with joy and laughter. We would often have barbecues in the backyard of our home, laughter ringing out as the sun set on another lazy summer day. I could hear my husband's voice, teasing me about my tendency to burn the garlic bread. I took a deep breath and inhaled the present, but the past lurked just beneath the surface, ready to pounce. I stepped inside, and that's when I saw her. My husband's ex-wife, Lisa, was there, her laughter breaking through the silence like a slap. I felt my stomach drop. There was an electric charge in the room, a force that pulled at my chest, triggering a flood of memories I'd tried so hard to compartmentalize. The moment our eyes met, flashbacks raced through my mind, the sounds of gunfire, the sights of chaos, the courage I mustered to keep my ship afloat. And now, standing before me was a woman who had a part of my husband's history that I would never share. Lisa's expression shifted from surprise to something akin to fury. She opened her mouth wide and screamed, the sound echoing off the walls, piercing through my newfound serenity. "You think you can just waltz in here? You think that money can erase the past?" Her words were corrosive, igniting a tempest of emotions I thought I had buried deep. The anger, the heartache, the confusion, it all came rushing back, clawing at the edges of my sanity. I had faced far worse in the heat of battle, yet nothing prepared me for this visceral confrontation. But even in that moment of chaos, something deeper stirred within me. I wasn't just a veteran, I was a survivor. I had seen the underbelly of humanity, had fought for lives far more precious than mere dollars. The realization began to dawn on me. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for my life. My worth was not tied to the inheritance that had landed in my lap or to the shadows of my husband's past. I squared my shoulders, defiance rising like the tide within me. This was my life now, my chance at happiness. And no amount of screaming would take that away. Returning home after my deployment felt surreal. The streets I rode through, once so familiar, were now tinged with an uncomfortable nostalgia. Everything seemed the same yet different, as if the world had been paused while I'd been away, and now it had started playing again in fast forward. I thought about my husband, Tom, the life we had built, and how the weight of the past now loomed large over our future. The inherited wealth didn't feel like a blessing but more like a shackle binding me to the shadows of my new life. When I first learned about the $17 million, my heart raced, envisioning the possibilities. I imagined new beginnings, dream vacations, and the freedom to explore life's potential. Yet, every time I closed my eyes, I saw glimpses of the past, Tom's ex-wife, Rachel, with her cool demeanor and sharp tongue. The last time I had faced her was at our wedding, and it had been a contest of wills. Her sharp looks felt like daggers aimed at my happiness. I suppressed the growing dread that maybe the money I had inherited would only fuel the fire of animosity I had always sensed simmering between us. Then it happened. I was at the local coffee shop, standing in line, my heart racing with the nostalgia of ordering my usual. It was a day of impulse. I wanted to surprise Tom with blueberry muffins, his favorite. Just as I reached for my wallet, the bell on the door jingled, and my breath caught in my throat. There she was, Rachel, looking as polished and intimidating as ever, her eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. The smile that formed on her lips was anything but warm. I felt the air grow thick, an electric charge of unspoken words crackling between us. "Look at you, Amanda," she said, her voice dripping with a sweet sarcasm that turned my stomach. "Living the dream, I see." I could feel the eyes of the barista on us, the other customers pretending not to notice as tension mounted. In that moment, all the insecurities I had buried came flooding back. Was my role as Tom's wife somehow overshadowed by this sudden wealth? Did she really think she had any claim over me, or was she just trying to assert her presence in my life? I opened my mouth to respond, but the right words failed me, and instead, I felt a wave of frustration and vulnerability crash over me. "I'm just trying to do my best, Rachel," I finally managed, the weight of my voice barely covering the tremor of fear that underlined my words. Her laughter echoed, cruel and dismissive, cutting through the air. "You think money makes you better than me? Just remember, it was the same money that tore us apart." It stung. I clenched my fists at my sides, fighting back the urge to scream at her. How was it that her words felt like veiled threats, weapons meant to dismantle my self-worth? I glanced quickly at my feet, then back up at her, trying to find a sense of groundedness amidst the storm she had stirred up inside me. "I'm not trying to be better. I'm just trying to live," I said, my heart pounding as I stepped back, desperate to escape the suffocating tension. With that, I turned and walked out of the shop, the bell jingle behind me sounding more like a funeral dirge than a welcome. I needed to resolve this. The past was not going to be a shadow looming over my present if I had anything to say about it. But the doubt was there, gnawing at me. Could I really move forward, or was I doomed to be a puppet in a drama I never wanted to join? I had fought battles before, and now, I had to confront this one, the war against the past, my heart racing for the future, and the fight for my own space within a life that had already begun to feel overwhelming. The first day I stepped back into civilian life felt surreal, like I was navigating through a fog that refused to lift. After years spent dedicated to my country, the prospect of taking charge of my own life again felt daunting. I had the remnants of a military rhythm in my blood, but now, I faced a world that seemed to spin in a different direction. With the hefty inheritance weighing on my mind, I needed to carve out my own path, to prove that I was more than just a widow of war or a beneficiary of luck. I wanted to show everyone, including myself, that I had something to contribute. I decided to take a leap and visit the local community center. It was bustling with life, filled with laughter and the chatter of people who had formed bonds that I yearned to establish. I had always played a role in teamwork and leadership in the Coast Guard, but mingling with civilians felt like stepping onto foreign terrain. To ease my nerves, I I reminded myself that I had faced storms far worse than this, that I possessed skills beyond just navigating water. Today, I was going to sign up for volunteer work. It was a small start, but I felt it was a step toward reintegrating into a world I abruptly left. As I signed up to help with youth mentorship, I caught sight of a familiar face in the distance. It was her, my husband's ex-wife. The woman who had somehow managed to infiltrate my thoughts and stir a whirlwind of insecurities. The last time I saw her was during our wedding. Her presence was like a dark cloud hovering over what should have been a joyous occasion. As our eyes met, I felt a rush of heat surge through my cheeks. But I quickly straightened my back. I had already fought my battles, and I wasn't about to let her shake my resolve. I turned my focus back to the clipboard in front of me, trying to shake off the anxiety that laced my veins. However, fate had other plans. Moments later, as I was collecting supplies for the mentorship program, she approached me, her expression a mixture of disbelief and anger. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, a venomous edge to her voice. I felt a pang of irritation. This was my space now, my attempt to create a life that was worth something. I took a breath, letting the weight of her words wash over me without retaliating. "I'm volunteering. Trying to make a difference," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I was proud of my service, and I wanted to embody that pride by helping others find their footing. As her eyes narrowed, I realized I was at a crossroads, not just with her, but within myself. This wasn't just about her reaction, it was about how I viewed my own worth. I could feel the societal expectations, the murmurs of judgment inside my head. I was just the widow who inherited money, not the capable, self-sufficient woman I aspired to be. But I forced my shoulders back and met her gaze. "I want to show people that there's strength in every battle, whether it's fought on the field or within ourselves," I said, my heart racing with the fervor of my conviction. I didn't care if she approved. What mattered was that I was choosing to believe in my worth, even if she wouldn't. I walked away, leaving her behind in that chaotic community center, feeling a flicker of determination ignite within me. This was just the beginning, and I wasn't going to allow anyone to overshadow my journey. With money came the power to make choices, but my true strength lay in what I could give back. I was ready to embrace this new chapter, to write my own narrative of resilience and purpose, one that would help me find my footing in a world that had suddenly shifted beneath my feet. The moment I stepped through the front door of our new home, I felt the weight of the recent past tugging at my shoulders. It had been a long journey back from deployment, a journey filled with a mix of adrenaline and dread, a sharp contrast to the calm that enveloped me now. Our living room, spacious and airy, was a far cry from the cramped quarters I had grown accustomed to on the ship. Yet, instead of peace, I felt an unsettling knot in my stomach. The air was thick with unspoken words and lingering ghosts, especially of those I had lost. I caught sight of Jackson in the kitchen, his hands deftly chopping vegetables, completely absorbed in preparing our first dinner together. The scent of garlic filled the air, reminiscent of evenings spent in shared silence or laughter. I wanted to shake off the tension, to remind myself why I was home, why I had fought to come back and build a life with him. But then, a moment of panic surged through me as I recalled our last encounter with his ex-wife. Her scream echoed in my ears, a visceral reminder of the complication of love. The woman who had once stood at his side embodied everything I fought against during my years in service: chaos, uncertainty, and insecurity. Taking a deep breath, I forced myself to step into the kitchen, where Jackson turned at the sound of my approach. His smile was like a beacon, cutting through the darkness that threatened to envelop me. "You okay?" he asked, concern etching his brow. I nodded, trying to muster the confidence that had carried me through countless missions. "Just thinking about everything," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't just the money or the house, it was the life we were building together. I had fought alongside my comrades in battle, yet the real fight was internal. I was finally home, but I was haunted by the ghosts of relationships that had come before mine. The evening wore on, with dinner transitioning into quiet conversation, but my mind was still racing. I thought back to the weeks leading up to my arrival, the frantic phone calls, the papers piled high, the eerie silence at home that replaced the chaos of camaraderie among my peers. I had always believed that overcoming fear meant facing it head-on, but what did that look like in this new civilian life? As Jackson reached for my hand across the table, warmth flooded through me, and I realized at that moment that I didn't need to be defined by the shadows of others. There was a history I couldn't change, but I could carve out my own space within it. With each slice of laughter we shared, I felt the tension begin to dissolve. I understood now that I could embrace both the past and the present. The war I had fought wasn't just in distant lands, it was a constant internal battle of acceptance and belief in myself. I began to let go of the fear that had gripped me since returning. I had fought for my country, and now I needed to fight for my happiness. The transition might not be easy, but I was determined to rise above the murmurs of doubt. Jackson and I were building our future, and it deserved every bit of strength I could muster. When the evening settled onto the horizon, and the last remnants of daylight faded, I felt lighter. I was not just a product of my past, but a woman ready to embrace the future. I had forged my path through grit and resilience, carrying the weight of experiences that shaped me into who I was. I had come back from war, yes, but I wasn't retreating into shadows. I was stepping into the light, not just as a Coast Guard ensign but as a woman willing to seize her life and love boldly, no longer haunted by the specters of yesterday. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the grassy field where I stood with everyone else at the memorial service for those who didn't make it back. I hated to admit it, but my heart sank deeper than it usually did when I arrived at events like this. I had done my time in service, had faced dangers that rattled me to my core, but I still felt like a fraud standing there. The weight of my recent fortune and the shadow of my late husband's past loomed over me. It felt almost inappropriate, like a festive balloon at a funeral. As I listened to the speaker recount tales of bravery and sacrifice, I couldn't help but reflect on my own scars, both physical and emotional. These were not just remnants of past battles, they were reminders of resilience. I had entered the Coast Guard as a way to serve my country, a choice that had defined me since I was young. I had come to understand what it meant to fight, not just against tangible enemies, but against the demons that whispered doubts in my ear. It had taken grit to claim my identity, and now, standing in front of so many, I realized I needed to find ways to honor not just my own journey, but also my loved ones who had given everything. After the ceremony, I felt the weight of eyes on me again. This time, it was Jessica, my husband's ex-wife, who had often found ways to diminish my accomplishments. She thrived on attention, always competing, always comparing. As she approached, her presence felt electric, charged with a history filled with envy and unresolved anger. I braced myself, expecting the onslaught, but she surprised me. Instead of a bitter remark, she simply stood there, slack-jawed, her face a canvas of confusion and disbelief. Maybe she thought the money would make me weak, or that I would crumble under the pressure of what was ahead. But that wasn't who I was. I had survived combat. I could certainly handle a confrontation. How did you? Her words were barely a whisper, almost lost in the wind. It took everything in me to stand tall. I wanted to remind her that persistence is forged in the hearts of those who dare to face their fears, who refuse to be defined by the shadows of others. It's my time now, Jessica. I'm not going anywhere, I replied, firm yet calm. I could feel the residual anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I knew better than to let it guide my actions. I had fought too hard to be here, not just in the line of duty but also in my personal life. As she stared back at me, something shifted. The hostility that was always present seemed to soften, if only for a moment. I thought of my own journey through grief and struggle, the work I'd put into rebuilding my life after loss. Maybe, just maybe, she could see that beneath the surface of wealth and appearance was a woman who had fought in her own right. I wasn't just a soldier, I was a survivor, someone who had grown from every experienced life through my way. And while I couldn't change our history, I could reclaim my narrative. Walking away from the conversation, I felt lighter, empowered, and more resolute. I was determined to make the most of this new chapter, no matter what anyone else thought. The wind whipped through my hair, a sharp reminder of all I'd weathered. I stood on the deck, gazing out at the horizon where the ocean met the sky, much like my life, vast and filled with uncertain promise. Memories of the war still lingered, haunting me in quiet moments. I often recalled the faces of friends I'd lost, the loud echoes of gunfire replaced now by the silence of a world that seemed almost foreign. I felt the weight of my inheritance, $17 million, a burden I was still learning to carry, especially with the whispers of my husband's past looming over me like storm clouds. The day I first saw her, I had just come back from a mission. After facing the horrors of war, I truly believed I could handle anything. But when my husband's ex-wife burst into our lives, her shrill voice was like a bullet I hadn't seen coming. I could still hear her sharp intake of breath, see the way her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief as they settled on me. She was the kind of woman who wielded her past like a weapon, and my heart sank as I realized I was now part of that battlefield, caught in the crossfire of their unresolved history. I thought I had prepared myself for this moment. After all, I was a woman of the Coast Guard, I knew how to navigate tides and storms. But nothing could have adequately equipped me for the emotional turbulence that followed. When she screamed, my instinct was to brace myself, to stand tall and face whatever storm she would conjure. Yet, in that instant, I felt a wave of vulnerability wash over me. I wasn't just Amanda, the ensign, I was also a woman who had experienced loss on multiple fronts. My heart raced as the memories of my comrades flashed in my mind, their faces now blending with hers, lost souls looking for peace, just like me. Days turned to weeks, and the tension never quite dissipated. Every encounter with her was like a test of endurance, a reminder of the life I was stepping into. I often found myself thinking about how grief, no matter its form, shapes us. I had lost friends, a sense of normalcy, but I was still here, reclaiming my life one day at a time. The struggle between my identity as a veteran and this new life wrapped in wealth and uncertainty sometimes felt insurmountable. I questioned how to honor my past while forging a future, all while navigating the fragile dynamics with my husband's ex-wife, whose every look seemed to say she believed she had a claim to him that I could never hope to understand. With each confrontation, I learned resilience. I leaned into my role, not just as a wife but as someone who had faced real battles, both in combat and within interpersonal conflicts. There were days I felt I was drowning in her scorn and bitterness, dark waters that threatened to pull me under. But I kept swimming, kept searching for the light. I started to engage with her, not as an enemy, but as someone who had also experienced a version of tragedy, someone bound by the complexity of love and loss. It wasn't easy, but I remembered a lesson from my time at sea: every storm, no matter how fierce, eventually passes, and sometimes, it's the dark days that lead us to the brightest tomorrows. The moment I stepped through the door into the small gathering hall, I was greeted with a chorus of warm, familiar voices. It was a small reunion, a chance to connect with my fellow service members from the Coast Guard. I had been anxious about this event, about how I would be perceived after my recent return from deployment and all the changes that had accompanied it. This was supposed to be a celebration of camaraderie, but I was still wrestling with the adjustments of returning home, not just as a soldier, but now as someone who had unwittingly become a millionaire overnight. As I entered the room, I caught sight of familiar faces, old friends, mentors, and some younger bikers I'd once trained. The laughter and teasing were palpable, and I felt a surge of pride as I scanned the crowd. The camaraderie we shared during those long months at sea had forged bonds that were almost unbreakable. But I couldn't shake the feeling of being an outsider. My recent wealth, while a blessing, felt like a barrier. Would they see me as someone who had come into fortune, or would they still see me as the no-nonsense ensign they had trained with? My heart raced as I approached the group. Then, it happened. One of my former instructors, a gruff man who usually kept his emotions at bay, turned to me with a wide grin that lit up his weathered face. "Look who's back. The only ensign I know who can swim as well as she can stick her landing on a boat." His words hung in the air, and I felt a sudden weight lift off my shoulders. Recognition from my peers mattered deeply to me. It was a reminder that my worth was tied not to the money I had inherited, but to the skills and tenacity I had built over years of dedication and hard work. As the night wore on, I found myself lost in conversation, sharing stories from the front lines and laughing as we reminisced about shared experiences. The warmth of their acceptance wrapped around me like a blanket. I never expected my peers to embrace me so fully, and it filled the void that had been gnawing at me since my return. They sought my opinion on ongoing operations, asked for my input on strategies, and that familiar spark of belonging flickered to life again. I was reminded that my efforts and sacrifices were recognized, and that my identity as an ensign transcended the fortunes I had recently inherited. However, amidst the joy, there was a shadow lurking in the corner of my mind, the recent encounter with my husband's ex-wife. Her unexpected reaction still played on repeat in my thoughts, jarring against the harmony of the reunion. She had screamed at me, an eruption of jealousy and anger, but I refused to let that define how I felt about my position now. My peers were a reminder that my journey was still about service, about dedication to something greater than myself. I wouldn't let anyone tarnish the pride I felt in my career, even if my life had taken an unexpected turn. I was back, and I was ready to reclaim my narrative, one connection at a time. I stood frozen at the entrance of the swanky restaurant, the air laden with the richness of expensive cuisine and the distant clink of fine china. It felt as if I had just stepped off a ship, the familiar ebb of tension washing over me. My heart raced as I scanned the crowd for him, my husband, Logan. The moment I spotted him at the bar, laughter spilling from his lips, the knots in my stomach tightened. The sight of him was a bittersweet reminder of the life I was fighting to reclaim. But that wasn't all. Standing beside him, her hair perfectly styled, was his ex-wife, Julia, whose bright smile coiled into a frown the moment our eyes locked. I felt the world tilt slightly on its axis. She had always been the polished, poised woman who had, for so long, circled around his life like a hawk. And now, here she was, in the flesh, her presence a jagged reminder of everything I had tried to push aside, my insecurities, the ghosts of Logan's past that followed him like a steadfast shadow. The years of hard-won confidence I built in the Coast Guard felt suddenly fragile as I contemplated the chaos of emotions bubbling just beneath the surface. I couldn't help but wonder if the money I had inherited had opened up wounds neither of us were ready to face. "Isn't she cute?" Julia called out, her voice dripping with condescension, piercing through the chatter. I felt heat rush to my cheeks, and for a moment, I thought I might suffocate under the weight of her disdain. The other patrons quieted, their curious eyes darting between the two of us, as if they were waiting for a spectacle. I took a shaky breath, reminding myself that my rank as an ensign in the Coast Guard didn't just signify authority, it also meant grit. I wouldn't let her intimidate me. I stepped forward, feeling a newfound resolve pump through my veins. "Julia," I said, forcing my voice to remain steady, "I didn't realize you would be here tonight." The polite tone felt foreign in my mouth, but I masked it with a practiced smile. She tossed her head back, laugh lines deepening as pleasure flickered across her features. There was no hiding what she felt: satisfaction, perhaps relief, a sense of victory in seeing me squirm. "Oh, it's a small world, isn't it?" she replied, her words laced with feigned charm. I could sense the anticipation in the air, the spectators looking at us like two gladiators preparing for a duel. I took a step closer, emboldened by the weight of my past experiences. "Seems my life has gotten a little more interesting since I came back." I fought to keep my voice even, forcing back the flood of emotions I could feel clamoring to break free. It was time for clarity, to dismantle the illusions that lingered between us. "I'm not here to take Logan away from you. I'm just trying to figure out where we fit into each other's lives." The truth hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Her expression faltered, the momentary loss of composure a victory in itself. It was a small step, but it felt monumental. I was actively reclaiming my own narrative. The tension shifted, and Logan turned, his brows knitted in confusion. His eyes darted between us, searching for clarity amid the storm that had suddenly erupted. I caught a glimpse of his deep brown eyes, the warmth I remembered grounding me in the chaos. I wanted to reach out to him, to explain everything that was unraveling, but I also wanted Julia to see me as I truly was, a woman who had fought for every inch of her life. No longer merely defined by my husband's past, but as a partner standing tall in the present, prepared to face whatever came next. I stood in the living room, the air thick with tension, as my husband's ex-wife, Lisa, let out a scream that felt like it sliced through the very fabric of the room. Her face paled as she absorbed the sight of me, and I could practically feel the gears of her mind grinding as she wrestled with the implications of my presence. We were supposed to be celebrating the news of my inheritance, this unexpected windfall that had landed on my shoulders after my return from a war I had fought for my country. But instead, there was an unspoken battle brewing between us, laden with years of resentment and unresolved history. As I glanced at my husband, Tom, I could see a mixture of shock and unease on his face. He had always tried to maintain peace between the two of us, but this was the first time Lisa had been so vocal, so overtly hostile. I wanted to reach out to him, to ground myself in his presence, but I felt an invisible barrier rising between us. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had endured unimaginable hardships while serving my country, but now the real fight felt like it was playing out right here in our home. I took a steadying breath, trying to remain calm, reminding myself that I had faced greater dangers in my life. Lisa, this isn't what you think, I started, choosing my words carefully as if I were addressing a hostile crowd instead of a woman. I'm not here to steal anything from you, least of all Tom. I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes, but the walls she had built around herself were far too thick for an olive branch to penetrate. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice tinged with incredulity as she launched into a tirade about how I had taken her life, her marriage, her dreams. Each word was like a punch, and I found myself grappling with anger and sadness, uncertain of how to respond. It was as if the years of their shared past had suddenly closed in, and I was just an outsider watching a tragic drama unfold. Tom stepped forward, trying to intervene, but Lisa wasn't done. You think you're so special, don't you? She spat. You came back from your heroic service, with all this money, and now you think you can just waltz into our lives and take what's left of it? Do you even know what he and I went through? Her words hung in the air like a noxious cloud, and I felt the weight of her hurt settle around me like a suffocating blanket. I could sense Tom's discomfort. He wanted to smooth things over, but I could see the shadows of his own guilt creeping in. In a moment of clarity, I realized that I did know a thing or two about loss and resilience. I had faced the unthinkable and had come out the other side, but it was clear that this was a moment that demanded more than just my understanding. I needed to show her that my intentions were purely about building a future, not tearing down the past. With a firm voice, I addressed her once more, Lisa, I'm not here to compete or diminish your experiences. I'm just trying to make my own way, to find my own family in a world that feels different now. There was a long silence after my words hung in the air, and Lisa's expression began to shift, though not entirely. I could see her walls waver, even if just slightly. Tom took a step back, watching us both with concern, perhaps hoping for a resolution but not wanting to sway either side. It felt surreal standing there, caught between the ghosts of our shared history and the hopeful promise of a future that I desperately wanted to build with him. But the conclusion of this little interlude was yet to be written, and I couldn't help but wonder how many more battles lay ahead before we truly found peace. It's strange how much can change in someone's life, all at once. Just over a year ago, I returned from my deployment, carrying the weight of service and sacrifice. The hum of helicopters and the roar of the sea still echo in my mind, but today, they mingle with the laughter of my children and the soft glow of a new beginning. Inheriting $17 million felt surreal, like my life had leaped into a storyline crafted by someone else. It was daunting, but ultimately liberating. I have finally shed the burden of seeking validation from those who thought I was only what they made me believe. The moment Lindsay, my husband's ex-wife, saw me across the room, I could see the flicker of disbelief wash over her face. She had always belittled my ambitions, labeling me as just a coastie. I used to cower under her derision, perpetually seeking her approval, convinced that if I could just earn a sliver of respect, my worth would be validated. But that day was different. As I stood there in my tailored dress, the weight of her past remarks faded away, and an exhilarating realization surged through me. I no longer needed anyone's approval, least of all hers. I had walked through fire, and the flames had only forged my strength. Every laugh we shared, every moment of joy that filled our home, told me how far I had come, not just in wealth but in spirit. This new chapter has allowed me to redefine what it means to be successful. The quiet moments with my children, the camaraderie with my team in the Coast Guard, and even the new friendships that have blossomed around this fortune, they fill my heart more than any bank statement ever could. I have learned that wealth isn't just about money, it's about relationships, resilience, and recognizing the strength deep within oneself. That inner strength became my armor against those like Lindsay, who thrive on doubt and insecurity. Standing at the crest of a hill overlooking the vast expanse of the ocean, I felt as if I could breathe in the freedom I had fought so hard to attain. The sun dipped low, casting a golden hue on the waves, each glint reflecting the journeys of both past and present. It symbolized every challenge I had faced, every tear I had shed, and every small victory I had earned. This was my moment, my landscape, a testament to resilience, a reminder that I had fought through the storm and emerged stronger. As I turned away from the horizon, I carried with me the understanding that my worth is inherent and does not hinge on the opinions of others. Lindsay's voice might have echoed in the background, but now it was just a whisper against the larger symphony of my life. I am Amanda, a proud ensign of the U.S. Coast Guard, a loving mother, and a woman who no longer feels the need to shrink herself for anyone. With the sun setting behind me, I took a deep breath and smiled, knowing that I had finally embraced my journey, both beautiful and imperfect, and forged a path where I shine unapologetically. If you stayed with me until the end, thank you. Please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from.